I've seen Conor Benn's gone rogue on social media since he's been faced with a fair bit of criticism, not just from fans, but from fellow fighters as well, talking about how he doesn't seem to possess the same potent power he had before the adverse findings on those drug tests. Seems like an easy stick with which to beat Conor Benn. However, a lot of it is coming from fighters, including Josh Kelly, I think said he would, what was the word? He'd cook him. I think he said. He didn't say anything about the lack of power, but I think Devin Haney did. And Haney's someone that Conor Benn's been targeting. He gave a list of fighters immediately after the fight at the weekend who he wanted to go up against next. I looked through them all and I couldn't see many of them actually happening. Haney was on there. Eubank Jr. was on there. Kell Brook was on there. There was two more. And one of them was Mario Barrios, which I think is probably the most likely to happen out of the five named. I think, was it Terence Crawford? Or no, Errol Spence. Errol Spence was the other one. And I think Errol Spence had a little pop on social media as well. And Conor Benn said something about doing his other eye or something like that. So, yeah, I think people have definitely touched a nerve with this criticism of Conor Benn. The facts are that he's had 2 fights since the controversy broke, and both fights have gone the distance. But one of them was over the weight, so up at 154 pounds. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised. And Dobson was an unbeaten fighter with ambition. He wasn't a bad fighter at all. It was quite a competitive fight. So, maybe the power is still there. I've seen Conor Benn spar since all that news broke, and he seems to still be hitting pretty hard. His sparring partners say he's still hitting pretty hard. But they also say there's no smoke without fire. Josh, what's your view on the whole thing and obviously Conor Benn's performance?
Yeah, in terms of the performance, I think during the fight week, he was promising to get him out of there in 3 or 4 rounds, and the people around him in the camp, Jimmy Sames, George Liddard, I know Eamon spoke to them, and they said he was going to get him out of there pretty quickly, and he failed to deliver on that promise, which I think for the British fans and fans of Conor Benn watching on was probably a little bit disappointing. Dobson's by no means a world beater. He's a tough fighter. As you say, he was unbeaten going into that, but I don't think he was ever going to be a threat to Conor Benn zero. And the expectation of Conor Benn against someone like a Peter Dobson was to get the knockout, and a little disappointing from my point of view that he wasn't able to get that. As far as the power goes in a more long-term look, I think you can't judge him on these 2 fights. The first fight was against somebody, again, there was as you say, was much bigger than him. Has obviously come out with the positive test that came out in the weeks following that. And he's come off a long layoff as well in that fight against Orozco. And similarly against Dobson, he's still very much getting back to his best. And I think we will see the best of Conor Benn again, whether that's the next fight or that's a little bit later in 2024. He'll have much sterner tests than Dobson, and fingers crossed that's where we see the best of Conor Benn.
The Messenger 215 says, why is Conor banned from fighting in the UK? So let's clarify this once and for all. He's not banned from fighting in the UK. He doesn't currently have a British Boxing Board of Control license. He voluntarily rescinded his license when the controversy began. And since then, there have been talks about him applying for a new license after he was, quote unquote, cleared by the WBC, and after his appeal was held up by an independent panel. But the board apparently told Eddie Hearn, we won't consider a license application while our appeal is going through. So this is the appeal from the Board of Control and from UCAD against the original panel's decision that the suspension on Conor Benn be lifted. While the board and UCAD are appealing against that, and apparently there's a date for that hearing this month in February, the board said they would not consider a new license application from Conor Benn until that process is played out. So he's not banned from fighting in the UK. He just can't get a Board of Control license at the moment. So if he were to fight under another governing body in the UK, no one would be able to stop him doing that. I just don't see that as a route they want to go down. I think they've got high hopes of winning the appeal in February. And if they do, then we can expect to see him back applying for a Board of Control license. And it'll be very difficult for them to refuse him a license if they lose the appeal. But we shall see. Thunder Road says, oh yeah, so there's been some talk about Tank Davis. I'm trying to remember what his new name is. Sorry, don't mean to be disrespectful. Waleed, I can't remember the surname. But either way, the artist formerly known as Tank versus Conor Benn. There's been some talk of that. Tank seems to really want the fight, or Tafka Tank seems to really want the fight. Conor Benn hasn't really responded yet, but there's been a lot of criticism about Tafka Tank being willing to take this fight up at 147. Ben's a big welterweight, rehydrates up to a huge, I think it's something like 170 pounds, so not far off light heavyweight, but wasn't keen on fighting Devin Haney at 140 pounds. The reason apparently was that Haney would be too big once he rehydrated. He certainly wouldn't be 170 pounds. So it's an interesting one. I'm not sure why anyone would want to see that fight necessarily. It's kind of come out of left field, but we shall see. But Thunder Road says, at what weight would Tank versus Ben make any sense for Tank? Why would he come up to 147 to fight someone like Ben, skipping all the options at 140? Absolute joke, this. DB Cooper, how does Gervonta Davis not want to fight Haney at 140 plus? Because he thinks it's too big, but he's happy with 150-pound Ben. That's kind of what I just said. The Messenger 215 says Conor Benn won't sell in the USA. I don't think it's necessarily about him selling. I think it's about keeping him busy, building his profile while he can't fight in the UK. I think, using that time off or enforced time off with a positive thing that they can do. Abdul Wahid says Ramoni Mode XD. I appreciate that. He says, yes, he has responded. They're in talks with Eddie. Check the latest news, Danny. I did have a quick look on Twitter, but I don't know if it escaped your notice, Ramoni Mode XD, but I'm doing a live stream here. There's only so much looking down at my phone I can get away with before people start having a go at me. But yeah, so we'll see if that comes to anything. But yeah, I thought it was not a disappointing performance. I think Ben's blown a lot of people out, like faded former contenders and former champions, the likes of Chris Algieri, Chris Van Heerden, and so on. And it's kind of good in a way to see him going up against people that can take the stick. Whatever the reason is they can take that stick, I'm not overly bothered at the moment. I think it's good that he's getting around and he's having to work harder to open people up. Yeah, I think that's a good thing. And I think if he comes back to the UK for his next fight, goes up against someone who's, really trying to win and someone who's a better style match for him as well, then maybe we'll see that KO power return. But I thought it was a decent enough performance from him and more to come. He's still quite young and he's still quite fresh in his career. Didn't have an amateur career to speak of. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes next.